Hello there, I'm Orkhan Amashov and welcome to Context. Today we take a nuanced look at the evolving diplomatic landscape surrounding Ukraine, where negotiations, security concerns and economic recalibrations continue to shape the trajectory of the conflict. A coalition of the willing, led primarily by the United Kingdom, has reiterated its commitment to de-escalation, peace and Ukraine's sovereignty. Simultaneously, the United Nations and European leaders continue to advocate for a structured and sustainable agreement, emphasizing economic stabilization and humanitarian imperatives. Russia, for its own part, has articulated firm preconditions: Ukraine's neutral status, sanctions relief, and assurances regarding NATO's regional posture. In fact, both sides, Ukraine and Russia, demand some mutually exclusive guarantees, and as both sides entrenched in their positions, the diplomatic challenge lies in reconciling these divergent priorities. The question is not merely whether a settlement can be reached, but whether the conditions exist for substantive progress. As these discussions unfold, are we witnessing the early contours of a resolution or the entrenchment of a prolonged diplomatic impasse? Joining me now to explore these developments in greater detail are two esteemed analysts offering diverse perspectives on the evolving situation. From Vilnius, we have Alexandra Filipenko, analyst, scholar, specializing in particular in American affairs. From Madrid, we are joined by Enrica Cosera, political analyst and geopolitologist. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you for having me.
Alexandra Filipenko, first of all, we are in the midst of evolving situation. Really, we receive different pieces of information on a regular basis. First of all, what's your reading of the situation, and specifically, in your judgment, what are those areas where Kyiv does not want to negotiate? What are Ukraine's red lines now?
Well, first of all, I must say that the situation is really complex, and the situation is complex, first of all, for the American side. Donald Trump has been repeating that he would end the conflict, he would end all wars, including Russia's war with Ukraine. First, he was saying in 24 hours. Now, apparently, as he says, he was ironic, saying that he would end the conflict in 24 hours. Things are way more complicated than that. And we see what Secretary Rubio, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are saying, that right now what the American side is trying to get from Russia is a 30-day ceasefire. That would be the first step, and only then the talks about a real peace would start. These are the first step. This is only the first step. But for Ukraine, for the Ukrainian side, Ukraine wanted to unite those two steps, the ceasefire with peaceful negotiations. They wanted real defense from the United States. They wanted at least some guarantees, security guarantees from the American side. Right now, we see that President Zelensky is ready to sign the 30-day ceasefire that can be prolonged after those 30 days. He is ready to sign it. But now President Putin is not that ready. So first of all, for Ukraine, those red lines are basically a little bit crossed, because the first red line was security, was defense from the United States. This is already passed by, Ukraine already passed that by. So right now, the main problem for Ukraine is how much of its territory Ukraine will keep right now. Of course, these are the red lines, not to give up to President Putin, first of all, those territories for good, even if right now they're occupied, to have some kind of a statement or some kind, let's say, the wording of the documents must be that those territories are occupied, but they do not belong to Russia. For example, the same view that the United States had on the Baltic states, on Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia after the occupation of those countries by the Soviet Union. So this is the next red line that Ukraine will try not to cross.
Enrica Cosera, high-level Ukrainian sources briefed on the ongoing talks claim to have been warning that there is little trust that Russia will accept what Ukraine would regard a reasonable deal, and they're adding that Russia could come up with another trick. That's what they're saying. That's what we are given to understand what Ukrainians think about what Russians will say. Do you think Russia will accept this 30-day ceasefire plan? If not, why? What is the fundamental Russian reservation? After all, it's only for 30 days.
I think that the main Russia consideration about not accepting the ceasefire is they want to explain their narrative or whatever you want to call it. I don't think this not. Sometimes Russia talks more closer to a fairy tale than a geopolitical geostrategy approach. But Russia conditioned the ceasefire to make him able to explain that why they invaded Ukraine in the first place, and probably that narrative is going to be extended and is going to explain broader the way Russia wants to came up with a new solution with which includes probably taking over the Mother Russia, the concept of Mother Russia. So a ceasefire is conditioned right now to make or to let Russia to explain why Russia is doing what it's doing. I mean, the last week we saw how Kursk was recovered by Russia, was sieged by Russia, and then the ceasefire came, and with those two elements, Russia said, okay, I can accept the ceasefire, but let me explain why I did that, and probably that explanation is gonna be, as I said, it's gonna be broader. It's not going to take only the Donbass and Crimea in Ukraine, but any other places that Russia can justify to be annexed or invaded, or as I said, whatever the verb you wanna use this time. I mean, it's just a question of justifying why Russia is doing what Russia is doing, and I consider that a very, I don't want to see childish, because we're not dealing with little children, but it's like if I can concede the ceasefire if you let me to explain why I'm doing this and why I'm gonna keep doing whatever I want to do.
Thank you. Alexander Filipenko, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said earlier that plans for military support for Ukraine now entering operational phase. And what does operational phase mean in the first place? And many analysts say that British Prime Minister sent his strongest signal yet, that allies would do their level best to put troops on the ground in Ukraine to support a ceasefire. Because there are two conflicting considerations, which are not necessarily conflicting, but we could look at them as part of one whole. One is that Ukraine will be able to negotiate a fair ceasefire if the circumstances on the ground favor Ukraine. It does not favor. Those circumstances do not favor now. And secondly, if there is going to be a ceasefire under the current circumstances, it should be backed up with strong military support. What do you make of the operational phase comment made by the British Prime Minister?
Well, I think this gives great leverage to Donald Trump. We've heard that Donald Trump is the peace dove. He is the one who will be negotiating with President Putin. His phone conversation with President Putin is expected tomorrow, probably evening European time. But anyways, Steve Witkoff, Special Envoy Witkoff, said that the call about the ceasefire is expected on on Tuesday. So now Donald Trump will have this opportunity to, let's say that Europeans are acting on their own, that Europeans are doing their own thing, because Donald Trump will talk to Putin, and he will explain the American position. And now we are seeing how the Trump administration is cutting back the Justice Department's War Crimes Action Team that was created to coordinate United States efforts to combat Russian war crimes. The State Department has canceled a contract that helped track and document the abduction, actually, of Ukrainian children, etc., etc. So we're seeing all that action, let's say, from Washington, showcasing that Donald Trump understands and accepts the philosophy, let's say, of President Putin in a way. At least also Steve Witkoff said that Putin knows the philosophy of Trump. Now Trump shows that he also understands what stands behind this concern of President Putin, that Ukraine is actually historically partially Russian and that he's not committing war crimes, etc., etc. But at the same time, the European Union is acting on their own. Emmanuel Macron is acting on his own. And now we're seeing this power player, Europe as a power player. On the one hand, Trump is pushing Europe to be more powerful in Ukraine and to support Ukraine even more. And I believe this will also give some leverage for Trump to end his conversation with Putin, showing that the United States are so open and so supportive of a peace deal, and that also United States understand why and what the Kremlin is doing. They are not together with the European Union, but Europe is a power player on their own. So I suppose that this is actually maybe, if not supported by, but at least not doesn't go against any American interest. And I think Washington is happy to see this activity, let's say, on the European side. But of course, for now, we understand that military might, that's what's needed for this 30-day, at least 30-day ceasefire to stand.
I also would like to welcome John Dugan, a political analyst who's joining us from, I believe, Moscow, Russia. Mr. Dugan, welcome. What is the situation there in Moscow? I mean, we've heard quite a lot about Russian sensibilities. We understand that Russia sees any foreign peacekeeping effort as an external involvement, which will not be acceptable for Russia. Do you think the ceasefire proposal will eventually be accepted by Moscow?
I don't, unless there are some extraordinary circumstances, and I'm going to tell you why. We had peace agreements before, the Minsk Accords, for instance, and they were completely ignored. They were utilized by the Ukrainians and by the U.S. government and by NATO to basically stock weapons into Ukraine to make it a lot more powerful than it really should have been. And the essence of those peace deals were absolutely ignored. And even Angela Merkel had admitted to this. You know, fool me once, but don't fool me twice is the old adage in politics. And Putin is not going to fall for this game by Europe again. So there's going to have to be some steps that Europe is going to have to do, and there's going to be some steps that the United States is going to have to do. But Moscow is not going to sit back and let all of their momentum get interrupted just so they have to try to build it back up again.
What are those steps that Europe and the United States should take for Moscow to be more receptive?
Well, he's been clear for years, and this is not a new thing. This is not since 2022 thing. This is a sense that followed the Soviet Union thing, where NATO is absolutely not to go into Ukraine. Okay, that's number one. Number two, Zelensky is a compromised guy. All right, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. This is not a guy that's a reliable leader, so he's got to go. And there needs to be somebody friendly or at least neutral, that is in the presidency of Ukraine, you know? So that's going to be the second thing. They're going to have elections, and I think the people understand that if they want peace, they have to kind of, you know, have a middle ground on who they select as their leader. Because you can't, you know, you could never expect Russia and China to put a hostile military organization into Mexico. The United States would never stand for it. And Russia should not stand for a hostile military alliance to be on their border, especially in Ukraine, where, you know, they have their strategic bases. So that's going to be the second thing. And the third thing is, look, this whole minerals deal, I was a little skeptical at first, but, you know, once I started evaluating why it's so important, the United States is not going to stand for Russia coming across the Dnipro and messing with the minerals deal. And Russia, they want the same. So I think these are three very important parts of the puzzle that are going to have to be laid out and worked on. And I think that nobody in Europe has any idea how to do it. I think the only person who is capable of even beginning this process is Donald Trump.
Enrico Corsaro, John Deegan talked about the, as he described them, fundamental elements of the puzzle and talked about middle ground. What do you make of his comment?
Mm-hmm. Von Clausewitz used to say the most popular and most famous quote by von Clausewitz was, war is politics by other means. But for me, the most important one was, okay, if you want to set a peace, if you want to have a middle ground, or have a finish to the war, you have to have some of the enemy's territory conquered in order to deal with that and to retrieve and to recover yours. And with Kursk, with the falling of Kursk, this is going to be really, really complicated for Ukraine. And I think Ukraine is right now more a client than a dealer on whatever the outcome of the peace is going to be, because Ukraine has no ground to release, or no ground to deal with. So right now, the main power or the main strength in Ukraine is keeping a very good alliance with Europe in order to reach a settlement, in order to reach a peace with some sort of equilibrium right now. So from my point of view, Ukraine is that middle ground is not that middle ground. It's not a middle ground as a definition, because there is no middle right now. Russia got more capital, more things to deal with, more things to negotiate with than Ukraine, and I think the Ukraine position has impoverished a little, not a little bit, has impoverished in some quantity from the last 3-4 weeks. So I think here the middle ground is not going to be placed on the table only by Ukraine. It gotta be also deal with the course of whatever Europe wants to play.
Alexander Filipenko, I would like to hear your reflections on what you think about what John Deegan said earlier and about this middle ground, because fundamentally the discussion here revolves around the necessity of compromise. And as long as Ukraine is bound to make those compromises, that definitely means territorial concessions, perhaps with some permanent consequences. I think we can't exclude that possibility. What do you think?
Yes, absolutely. I think now it is obvious that Ukraine will have to make some territorial concessions. And now the main question is how far beyond those red lines that we talked about at the beginning, Ukraine can go. They have to, of course. There is no question that parts that were occupied by Russia starting from 2014, talking about the Donbass region and Crimea, of course, they are probably out of the question. But the thing is, the problem is that in a Russian constitution, now the territory, the Ukrainian territory that was included, let's say, in Russian constitution is way vaster than those territories occupied at the beginning of the war. They also include the territories occupied during the full-scale invasion that started in 2022. But I must say that quoting Mike Waltz, quoting him in one of his interviews, in a recent interview in Fox News, saying, we know who we are dealing with, we know what we're dealing with, and we have to dealing and engage in diplomacy, first of all. We're engaging in diplomacy, and of course, as also Special Envoy Witkoff said, that they are discussing right now, the US and Russia are discussing also not only Ukraine, but they are also discussing access to ports in the Black Sea. So there are a lot of ground that must be covered, but Ukraine definitely needs to give some concessions.
Thank you very much indeed, Alexander Filipenko, John Dugan, and Enrico Corsera. Mr. Dugan, I wish we could have had a longer conversation, but because you joined a bit late, that's the reason why your participation in this program was eventually very limited. But hopefully, in the fullness of time, we'll be able to compensate for that. Thank you very much indeed to all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, as diplomatic efforts continue and security discussions unfold, the path to a resolution in Ukraine remains uncertain. Are we edging towards a peace, or is this another cycle of stalled negotiations? The truth is that we don't know really, but probably the former is going to be the case. But the question is, at what cost? We'll be watching how the next steps unfold, and until then, thank you for joining us on Context. I'm Orkhan Amashov, and see you next time.